We're back with another video. This time I'm talking about trend lines. Trend lines are fascinating. And I've seen them my entire career. So whether I've worked with the absolute professional, someone who's on a trading desk or a fund or even some sort of quant desk, or maybe just an absolute new trader like myself. I was a new trader at one point. We were all new at one point. Trend lines are sometimes used. And I mean that. I've seen fundamental investors, almost Buffett types, actually draw trend lines on their charts before. And trend lines, by the way, are an art. There is no science to trend lines. Everyone draws them differently because at the end of the day, people are looking for points on the chart to try to connect something. And what they're trying to connect is some sort of past behavior, so all of this prior price action, that can be a clue into what might happen into the future. And that's the whole point of trend lines. So you're trying to spot something like, hey, the market likes to buy every time at this level, so that's where I'm going to buy or that's where I'm going to sell. So a great example actually is if we just go to the SPY, which is an S&P 500 ETF, and then go to a daily chart, well, you're going to notice that right now, I don't even have to draw it, but there's just an absolutely beautiful trend line here. And if we have our trend line tools, whatever platform we're on, you can see that firsthand. So let's talk about what that means. Well, the trend line here is quite simply a point in time. So there's a starting point. And then as it moves along that trend line, price touches that trend line or gets rather close, and then just seems to follow it upward. So I'm circling right now all of the points on this trend line that have held. And with that being said, now you can kind of see that, hey, that's rather interesting. Does that mean that there are market participants out there who are quite literally buying along this trend line each time it touches it? Am I the only one doing this, or are there a lot of people out there doing this? And does it even make sense? Because after all, it's a trend. And trend requires people to follow it. That's how trends get started. People follow things, then it becomes a trend. It's like fashion. If something cool starts to pick up, it becomes a trend because lots of people start doing it. And so that's kind of the art of trend lines. You're trying to find cool trends. Hey, it's going a certain direction based on this trend, and I think that people are going to buy on this trend, so I will too. Of course, just education, not advice or anything like that, but the point being is that's the art of trend lines. Now, once again, it is a huge artful approach because there is no right or wrong way to do it. I've seen people draw trend lines across the chart. I've seen people draw trend lines up and down the chart. I've seen people draw trend lines as vertical lines for whatever reason. People have made triangles out of their trend lines to make wedges or things. Literally, it's just an art form. You see something, you think it means something, then you kind of go for it. You create this vision and this plan using that trend line. So I don't really knock trend line people. But I will say if you're going to use them, I do believe there are a few key things to know about trend lines. Number one is called the 3-point rule. I sort of live by this 3-point rule. So the 3-point rule is rather simple because if you draw a trend line with only two connecting points in time, so say, for example, you think this was the top of this point in Tesla, and then you think this was the midpoint. Well, that is pretty random because it's literally just 2 points. It's really easy to connect 2 points on a chart. In fact, I can just connect 2 points, all day here. I can go back and find 2 points to connect all the time. 2 points in time show up literally everywhere. It's talk about arts or talk about being random. That's 2 points in time means nothing really. So with that being said, where things do get a little more unique in the trendline world is, are there 3 touches or 4 touches? Now, why does that become unique? That becomes unique because that may just mean that other people are following it. Perhaps it is a trend. Perhaps all the cool kids are jumping on it. Perhaps they are trend following, or perhaps they have an automated system, or maybe there's some sort of dollar cost averaging approach. I don't know, but beyond 2, you start to say, okay, there seems to be some kind of repeating behavior here. And by the way, in terms of everyone who does knock technical analysis, when they say things like, past behavior doesn't mean anything, it's all random, it's all noise. Well, I would tell those same people though, but when you go watch an NBA game and you heard that a great player averages 20 points per game, what do you think they're going to score on that game you're watching? You're going to use that average. Or another great example is, let's say a great student has been getting A's over a period of time. You could quite literally envision this as being someone's almost report card. Like here's an A, here's an A. So they're just getting A's, right? And that's also because this is a time scale. So maybe they took a test in January, right? They're getting A's, they're getting A's, they're getting A's. So then the next question you ask is, well, what grade do you think they're going to get here? So it's one way to also think about trend lines is that you're studying behavior of price, but price is comprised of people. So you're actually just studying behavior of people. Same thing whether you're looking at trends in grades or in sports or anything like that. So going back to that first key point of trend lines, it's all, I call it the 3-point rule. Try to find more than 3 points. And that's sort of the key to this video. It's 3 or more touches. 3 or more touches. So you're looking for 3 or more touches to try to see if there's some sense of confirmation. In this case, no matter where we draw this trend line from, there are definitely more than 3 touches. And it's especially getting tight up here at the top, you can see. So that's a nice first rule, because 3 or more touches means it's possible that other people are following it. Which leads to the next point, actually, when I said it's possible, is that they don't always work. So trend lines do not always work. They are an art. You might be drawing something that no one else in the world is looking at. If no one else in the world is looking at that trend line, why would it work? Right? There's no trend there. No one else is following it. No one else is researching it. So you're going to lose sometimes. And as I've mentioned in my other videos, make sure you go watch them. You'll notice that most traders lose money. 90% of traders lose money. 90%. It might be more. So if trend lines worked, and considering how easy they are to draw, do you think 90% of traders would lose money? I don't think so. I think everyone would be rich. So they don't always work. In fact, they might lose more than they work. So that's rule number 2 of trend lines that you have to keep in mind. And on that note, the point of number 2 is, I would say, is having a backup plan. And the reason why that's point number 2 about them not always working is, let's say you did draw this trend line on this chart like us, and you feel so confident that you've got it right. You zoom in, and you're going to place a limit order right here. Well, first of all, that's mistake number 1. They don't always work. You have to be ready for this to potentially fail. So it might hit here and then slice through, and you might have been, you're holding the bag now. So if you think about that when you draw your trend lines, you'll be a little more risk cautious. So you'll say, okay, I think this trade will work. I feel good about it, but I'm going to be prepared if it doesn't. So I'll have a stop loss here. Or maybe you'll look for some additional research to confirm the trend line. We're looking at the S&P 500, so maybe you want to look at the inflation rate. So you see this trend line, but then you confirm that inflation's spiraling out of control. You're the only one who knows that. Well, actually, now maybe you found a short opportunity and you want to wait for this trend line to break and take it out. So that is the key of having a backup plan and always remembering they don't always work. They are not a magic sauce at all. And if you have that mindset, you'll prepare and you'll double check your trend lines a little bit better. Now, as I wrap up this video, there's a few more key things to discuss, but I'm going to end up on this third and final point. So you could consider this like a 3-step approach to drawing trend lines. What I think is incredibly important about drawing trend lines when you are drawing them is to know where your points start and end and what's connecting them. So you probably haven't noticed this throughout the video, but I've been drawing these trend lines pretty randomly. I'm literally just trying to show you an example, click, done. But that doesn't make much sense, and here's why. So we're looking at a candle chart, but if you'd like, you could actually do this same exercise on a line chart. Now, drawing your trend lines on a line chart might solve for what I'm about to say. But many traders out there do use candles. Now, what's fascinating about this, however, is you can see sort of the discrepancy in this trend line. At certain points, the trend line's not touching the candle. See, it's not touching it totally. At certain points, the candle broke through. At certain points, it held up and kind of broke through. Sometimes it did a mixture of both, right? So how is this trend line valid if there's no consistency throughout the life of the trend line? There's got to be some consistency. So if you are drawing ultra-scientific trend lines, you should say to yourself, I only draw trend lines, for example, that connect the wicks. That's the wick of the candle. So we're going to click this wick, find another wick, and it doesn't actually connect to any other point in the chart. That's only two connections. I would say that's not even worth drawing them. But everyone has their own different approach. I'm not saying that you should draw trend lines with the wicks. I'm just saying that's the type of consistency you should look for. And I'm going to tell you why that's important. Because the second you start drawing trend lines randomly like this is the second you just start making things up just to fit your narrative, just because you want the market to go a certain way, just to help your investment. So these random trend lines, right? It touches perfectly. It's totally random now. There's no consistency along this trend line. So you're going to want to stay consistent so you stay true to your rules, meaning if this line breaks right here, literally, if it breaks, I'm out. Not even asking a second question. I'm out of there. It didn't hold up. The trend was fake. It's not cool. No one else is on it but me. But if you start moving your trend lines around, you'll probably do something like this. Ready? Let's say the trend breaks right here. So now price is here, just where this arrow is. I didn't draw that great. Well, you might do this and then move your trend line down and say, well, the trend line's still technically in existence because it touched here and it touched here and it touched here. But now you're making things up just to fit your narrative. And that is never a smart approach. That's when people really start to get crushed in markets. So even though trend lines are an art, you want to try to develop some sort of personal science for you. You have these rules that you follow, you test them over time, and you don't move the goalposts around. Because guess what? The market does not care about your rules. They don't even care that you're moving them around. It's not going to change anything. But what is going to change something is if you have a repeatable process that can be tested over time and improved rather than just, moving the lines around as you please. So that is point number 3, is knowing where to connect, knowing your trendline connections. It's so important. In fact, I'm going to change that because it's actually not knowing your connections. It's really about trying to turn this art into a science. And really, it's your personal science. Because you're making these rules, then ideally you'll practice them, you'll study them, you'll learn from them, and you're building something that's really easy to copy and paste onto any symbol or asset class. So that's the third most important point, is to try to turn it into something that's scientific, repeatable. You're not bending the goalposts to make up new rules, and then it invalidates all your prior studies or prior trades. It's one process, connects to certain points, and now you go and place that trade over a period of time and see how it works. And by the way, on that point, I do actually want to showcase that, most traders do use candlesticks. But if you use a line chart, it just may give you a little more, support or a slightly different view, especially with trend lines, because you can just see the clarity now. The clarity is so much smoother on this line chart when drawing trend lines. There's not as much noise, and even though people love candles because of the information they convey, I'll make a video on candles. The thing is that these, when they're turned into a line, it's a little smoother. And actually, this is a fantastic exercise that I learned from a trader named Dez. He's a part of Grok Trade. Dez told me once, when you draw trend lines, one of the coolest things you can do to test out how you're doing is to first turn your chart to a line chart looking at one specific point in time. Daily chart, say it's set to a close. Here you go. Then turn that chart into a candlestick chart and see how it did. Or compare and contrast just how noisy candlesticks are. Maybe candlesticks are way too overused. Maybe there's too much noise in here. It must fake people out all the time because, look at this, Broke the trend line, you'd be out. Broke the trend line, technically, you'd be out. Broke the trend line, you'd be out. That's 3 different occasions. But if you're on a line chart, it really never actually broke that trend line once it got formed from here. And by the way, as a final point, because I didn't do enough in this video talking about future moves, and actually in this last point, I'm going to mark this out, where 2 points on the trend line sometimes can be helpful is, let's say you think this is a trend just on these 2 points. Well, if you'd like to make a predictive bet that this trend line will hold, you can start to do that. Now, it's fairly random, but you could start to prepare for that by looking ahead. Of course, I will say the point that I'm really trying to illustrate is you should at least find 3. So actually, just like this, we have 3 now, so it's even better. And we're technically nearing that point. And then you can extend your trend line. And just like someone who has a map and you're looking for your treasure, or you're trying to guide your journey, you could start to sort of plan ahead and just sort of look at what the next moves could be. You could do a number of different studies, draw them out, look at prior price history, copy, paste, other candles, see how it would bounce along the trend line. Tons of ways you can utilize them. Nevertheless, the point of this video was really just to try to bring a refreshing new perspective to trend lines, not only calling them what they are. They're not a magic tool. They're pretty random. They are an art. But that, there is some power to using them if you do it right, according to what I've observed over all these years. You're looking for 3 or more touches to get started. They don't always work, so you always have your backup plan. You're always prepared for something. And then, of course, you want to turn this art into a personal science so that it's repeatable. You're not just doing things randomly all the time. You have specific goals in mind. So, I must say, thanks a lot for sticking around my channel, and make sure you subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions. Happy to answer them.